Take two. Welcome, people of the pod, to special summer school edition of Office Hours with Carp and Loge, summer 2023. We're close to wrapping up the series, but we're going out with gusto. I am, as always, your co-host, Peter Loge, an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University, and I am joined by
Dave Karp, associate professor, George Washington University, School of Media and Public Affairs, and the member of this podcast who doesn't use words like gusto in a sentence.
Gusto.
Gusto?
Gusto. It's underused. It's underutilized.
Do our students tell you how old your references are, or is that just me?
Gusto.
Yeah,
I emailed them
just me because you don't grade me, you grade them.
And I don't.
They're thinking it.
I email them things to catch them up on the pop culture references. They, instead of, watching a lot of bad television, they studied, were good students.
How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. Both of us spent a little time in Europe, right?
Yeah. And you were in Paris?
I went to Paris and wrote 2 blog posts. Personality wise, it is so on point that like my wife came with and she was like, I want to walk through fantastic neighborhoods and stop into shops and see the city. And I was like, I want to sit in a coffee house and read and write things in Paris while the United States is awake and is asleep and not bothering me. It was stunning. It was wonderful.
That sounds like every angst-ridden college student's dream. You sit in a cafe de Mago with your coffee and you write the big important things.
I mean, they weren't big important things. They were blog posts, but I think they were pretty good blog posts.
I have to say, I was in Bilbao. I'm affiliated with a think tank in Bilbao in the Basque country in Spain. And my wife came over for part of it.
Tolkien says Bilbo, not Bilbao, right? Bilbao.
That kind of cultural mocking, isn't it? So my wife, I spent so much time there and I keep saying, I want to, wind up spend a semester teaching there. Something says always fun. Like, look, I'm going to come and see what it's like to be in the city, just wandering around without you. I don't get why you love the city so much. So we were there. She hung out. I did some work. We had some meetings. I had a grad student with me, met with some government officials and some others. And so I didn't write blog posts, but I did spend a lot of time, rushing to and from things. And then we spent time. We drove down the coast a bit, or up the coast a bit into the French side of the Basque country. So it was lovely. But the politics there, I got to tell you, are a hot mess, just like they are here. Hot mess. None of what our listeners don't care. Our listeners don't care. So what do we've got stuff to do. Before we get to it today, though, I do want to start with a sad note. The Beekeeper Group, which is a progressive communications firm here in town, was scheduled to have a conference coming up in a couple of weeks in Annapolis, and you and I, Dave, we're going to do a live podcast thing from there. The conference, however, has been postponed because the organizer, a partner at the Beekeeper Group's first employee, a young woman named Hannah Levy, passed away suddenly very recently, and 33, 6-month-old baby. Rocked the advocacy community, obviously. So our condolences to Ms. Levy and her family, and to everybody over at Beekeeper. The DC advocacy community is small, and we didn't know her, but by all accounts, she touched a lot of lives and was pretty remarkable. So our thoughts are with her and her firm and her family.
That's real positive.
So with that sort of a rough and weird transition, we do have other stuff to get to. The important reminder that we're all people doing work, but we also have to turn to the work. And the work at the moment we're going to talk about mostly today is, you have thoughts on Threads.
Yeah. So, we haven't had this podcast in a month, and never a month goes by without Elon Musk doing a bunch of things that I want to make fun of. And we've had a particularly eventful few weeks with Twitter breaking more than it has broken before. A couple weekends ago, they installed rate limits on Twitter, meaning you get, they started off as, if you're not paying for the service, if you're not subscribed to Twitter Blue, then you get 600 tweets to read per day, and then you're cut off. That's your limit, which is an interesting thing to do on an ad-supported platform. I've done a lot of writing about sort of what are the fundamental elements of Twitter. Never before had I mentioned the infinite scroll as a fundamental unit because I didn't think I needed to. That was just kind of, like it also uses electrons, but I wouldn't think to mention that because of course it does. But so they turned that off, claiming that this was to fight bots and spam. That's obviously not true. Like that, that's not how you would fight bots and spam. They probably shut that off because he's fired so many of his engineers and they weren't paying their Google Cloud bill. And he was having their last remaining engineers sort of build a replacement on their own. And the day that they rate limited was also the day that they were either supposed to lose access to Google Cloud or switch over to the new systems. So we don't know for sure. The best reporters on this beat happen to be on vacation right now, but it seems most likely that like Elon just did a stupid thing and broke his site more than usual. And in the midst of that, like Meta has been saying for a while that they wanted to build a Twitter clone. And so they came right out and they were like, okay, I guess we'll launch it this week. So Threads launched. This was just last week. Threads launched. It already has 100 million users. And I feel like we're now at a point, like I was predicting at the end of last year that we were about to head into 2005, essentially, that we were going to go back to a moment where there wasn't one site occupying Twitter's niche, but instead there were an awful lot of sites all doing the same thing. And people would respond like we did with social media sites back in 2005 of just having an account on everything and wishing that the mess would clear itself up. But I think this sort of raises a question for advocacy professionals of, okay, our audience used to, like the terminally online audience used to all be on Twitter. Now they're in like 6 different places. Are we just going to post the same content to all 6 places? Or how do we sort out Twitter, Threads, Mastodon, Blue Sky, the other ones whose names I can't even remember? Like what do we do with this mess and where's it heading? So I've been giving a lot of thought to that.
So let's talk about that. Before we do, I do have to give a shout out to Stephanie on Twitter, who sent me a Blue Sky invite because you wouldn't. And we promised her favorite listener status.
Definitely you have favorite listener status. You do, though I can't believe you let Peter on to Blue Sky. Blue Sky was supposed to be for the cool people.
And I got on Blue Sky and okay.
How do you like Blue Sky so far?
I use Twitter for news and soccer gossip, and not enough people are there for that. I give away a Blue
sports
Sky.
on Blue Sky. That's true.
What?
There's no sports on Blue Sky so far. That's true.
And right, so I don't know. For me, it was like Post, part of this, infinite bucket of social media sites. I was on Post. Thought, well, this is interesting. There's not enough here, which of course is, part of the problem. If there isn't enough there won't be enough there. But
So I'm loving Blue Sky.
Okay.
And I was thinking about this yesterday because like my favorite time on Twitter, like the time period I was enjoying Twitter the most was summer 2018. Because that was the summer that I was doing the first version of the Wired project. And so I'd go into the library, like GW's library every day, hunker down and read like between 6 to 8 old Wired magazines. And, some of it was just sort of recording one of my findings to kind of like trying to do the real project. But occasionally I would bump into something that was really interesting or fun, and I wanted to tell somebody. And the options were like, yell this at a librarian who's wondering why I've been there for 6 weeks, or like take a screenshot and just sort of, kind of like word vomit my ideas onto Twitter. And so I just started doing that. I created the hashtag Wired Archive, which was nice because I was the only person using it. And I would just like fully geek out on like, here is this 2 pages from 1997. Isn't this grand? And dozens of people thought it was interesting, but those people thought it was really interesting, right? So I like had this niche community, and then like, occasionally like Chris Anderson, who's the old Wired editor-in-chief, like he responded on a few things. He's like, oh no, here's some backstory here. So it was actually like practically useful, but it was like, there's like little niches of weirdos on Twitter, and I could be a weirdo and they would find me, and it was just fun. And like, you can't really do that on Twitter. I mean, like, I guess you could do that, but most of those weirdos aren't there. They've left for Mastodon and Blue Sky. But also like Twitter, like there was a poll over the weekend on Twitter like some user posted a poll that got like, I think several 100,000 votes. That was about like, do the Jews control society and are they trying to bring down Western civilization? And like 70% of the people who took the poll were like, yep, absolutely. We are white nationalists and anti-Semites. Like, I can't, like, I still have a Twitter account. I'm still posting my content there for whatever audience is left, but like, it's not really fun geek out land when also the people who love Nazis and wish they could be Nazis have taken over the site. We're not doing both those things there at once. And Blue Sky, it's still invite only, so it's still growing, but its growth picked up over that weekend when they rate limited. Like people started showing up, including a bunch of the like poli-sci Twitter nerds who I like love and cherish, and like a bunch of the tech and science technology studies people. And since it's the summer, I'm like reading a lot of the Wired magazines again. So the past few days, I've been reading a magazine every day, like taking a screenshot of the interesting thing and sharing it. And like I'm doing the Wired archive thing on Blue Sky, and it now has the subset of old Twitter that digs that. Like I'm getting like a dozen people liking and replying and sometimes saying, somebody yesterday was like, oh, if you think this is interesting, you should see this thing from Boing Boing magazine in 1997. And I was like, you know what? This is definitely what I'm doing today instead of my job. I have to read. Like, it was just like pure geek out fun. So like Blue Sky, it's got the shit posters. You're right, like it doesn't have sports commentary. Like it doesn't, like if I want to know what's happening in the NBA, I still have to go to Twitter or to Threads. We'll get to Threads in a second. But the like people making jokes and being super nerdy, like that I think has largely gone to Blue Sky. And since that's what I love Twitter for most, I'm in. Like I'm all my like observational comments are going on Blue Sky now because I'm comfortable there and the people who appreciate it are there. It's great.
So couple of things, and I want to pivot this to the comms piece of it. First, I was hoping for an easy transition to this tweet of all things, and you provide it. So Madeline Toomey runs a firm called Rufus in Maine. Put the link in the footnotes, Medium, my post on Medium, but also peterloge.com podcast. Madeline Toomey quote tweets somebody in June. She says, me explaining political TikTok to my clients. And what she's quoting is, quote, to be able to shitpost, you have to understand the subject matter really well. Antimatter founder and CEO Jonathan Lebov told TechCrunch last year, in a sense, shitposting is the highest form of consciousness. I saw that and immediately thought of you. And I tweeted at you, but you've already said you're not on that platform. But I think then you get to something super important in comms, which is you've got to go where your audiences are. Right. You have to talk to people where they are about what they're talking about. And like I use Twitter again for soccer news and some other breaking news. It's just an easy way to consolidate that kind of stuff. It's just not there on Blue Sky yet. If it gets there on Threads, terrific. But the first rule of comms is who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Right. Like, who do you want to do what as a result of what you're doing? How will the world be different tomorrow because of what you do today? Mm-hmm. And if all you're doing is dumping the same content on every possible platform, you're just cutting and pasting, you're committing one of the sins of the early web, right? Mm-hmm. Where early websites were magazine articles, but on your screen, not on a newspaper, mm-hmm. which was not an effective use of the medium. Like, mm-hmm. what does cutting and pasting tweets onto LinkedIn doesn't make any sense. Because LinkedIn's really active. I think you mock me all the time for this.
You are right that there is a chunk of what Twitter used to do that LinkedIn now does.
Right.
Like I always like part of it is because professors are the profession that use LinkedIn the least.
Right.
We don't need to go and search for a new job. And because of that, also, like every time I get an email from LinkedIn, they send it's either weekly or monthly. They'll send out the following employers would be interested in you. And it's always just a reminder of how bad their algorithm is for people like me, because it's things like, would you like to be a sales associate at Amazon? Would you like to be would you like to be a adjunct professor at Georgetown? It's not to sound snobbish, but I actually am not going to give up my tenured associate professor position to adjunct at another university. That's not.
I get Facebook ads asking if I want to be.
No idea how any of this works. Not at all LinkedIn. I
get Facebook ads asking me if I want to be a student in the Master's in Public Health program at George Washington University. where my wife teaches.
Yeah,
I am
yeah,
the
I
director
used to
of
get
the School
those
of Media
in,
and Public Affairs, or I could be a graduate student in my wife's department. I, but I think though, for the point is, that's exactly the point though, right? So if you got to know who you're talking to on LinkedIn and how you want to talk to them. Twitter has its own sort of sense and logic, right? Facebook has its own sense and logic. TikTok, it's like you just can't cut and paste across the board, right? So who do you need to reach? Where are they? What do they need to hear?
So, and this is where I think Threads gets kind of interesting. So again, the thing that makes Threads different from Blue Sky or Mastodon is that it is starting with immense scale, already at 100 million, and basically limitless budget, right? Like not actually limitless, but on the scale that we're playing here of like a few $1 billion is the most that any company could really spend in this space. And Mark Zuckerberg spent 10 to 15 billion dollars every year for the past few years trying to build the metaverse. He can drop $1 billion or so in order to, if nothing else, heckle Elon Musk into getting into a ring with him so that he can punch Elon Musk in the face, which he should really do now that I don't know if you saw this, but Elon, who is definitely on the wrong drugs. By the way, the Wall Street Journal reported about his ketamine usage like on the job. So like that's now a reported fact. But like Elon's on, I don't know what set of drugs, but I think it was 2 days ago on Twitter, since he's mad about Threads launching, he said that Zuck is a cuck, and then suggested they should have a literal dick measuring contest. So like Mark Zuckerberg's got to convince him to get into a ring. And my prediction is that Mark Zuckerberg is then going to give him a concussion that fixes whatever has gone wrong with him and made him act this way for the past while. Like I think he's going to unconcuss the guy or something. But the actual point that I wanted to make about Threads is because of the scale, the thing that I've immediately noticed, like I think there's a bunch of social media brand managers with a lot of pent up energy who are having fun on Threads because they kind of couldn't on Twitter anymore.
Right.
And that means immediately that's where the brands are. I expect that's where a lot of the sports comment, like already, like the sports sites that I follow for NBA, they all still have Twitter threads, but they still have Twitter accounts, but they're mostly posting commentary to Blue Sky or to Threads because they've been so done with Elon for so long that they're moving over there. Now that makes Threads not really my thing, like it, particularly since I never really was on Instagram, so I didn't have they're not seeding with accounts that I already followed. Like most of when I'm open Threads, most of what I see is celebrities I don't care about and influencers that I have never heard of posting pretty bland stuff. So it is definitely not for me. But for advocacy professionals, I think it's actually a really interesting thing to explore a bit because the Instagram audience is there. And if you were already doing something on Instagram, it was probably more visual. You should be thinking about when that massive audience is starting to look for text. We can play here in many of the ways that we could play with Twitter. I don't know how well it'll last. There's a lot they need to build out on that site. But like I do I can wrap my head around it being a threat to Twitter in terms of advocacy professionals and advertisers and brands, because it's already got that scale, and they mostly wanted that scale without the white nationalists and without Elon breaking things all the time.
I think, I mean, one of the challenges for social media is building a big enough following and also finding enough interesting people to follow. M&R Strategic Services, a progressive comms firm here in town. Full disclosure, I was a senior vice president there a long time ago. I'm not plugging them for that.
Also, when you say long time ago, it was like 70 years ago, right? Because you were old.
Give or take. Dial-up, back in the dial-up days, not back in the dial-up days. I was doing online politics back in the dial-up days.
Telephone days.
With a modem, so many stories. All right, so on July 6th, which is roughly forever ago in social media time, M&R posted some quick thoughts on how to use Threads. Again, I'll put this at peterloge.com podcasts and on my Medium page. The early guidance on Threads, Meta's answer to Twitter. What they like about Threads, it's an easy captive audience. You're not migrating to a new platform because it's Instagram, looks and feels like Twitter, good for rapid response. Posts can be longer. Their recommendation is download the app, check it out, try Threads. And like you said, take it for a test drive. If you have Instagram followers, there's really no disadvantage to doing this. And you can try, some people have been cutting and pasting Twitter content onto Threads. Because like you, I have an Instagram account, Mostly for my purposes, it's Pinterest. Oh, look, here's a picture of a cool car. Here's a picture of a cool car. And I would spend like hours just looking at other people's pictures of cool things, which is not a good use of time. But if you're active on Instagram, you got a following, sure, go to Threads, but bear in mind, again, it's what are you saying to whom? What do they need to hear? And what do you want them to do about it? Right. So at some level, comms is comms is comms. Right. And this isn't the brand new thing that's going to change how we do communications. This is an interesting new medium. You've got to adjust to the nuances of the medium, but it's all about who do you want to get to do what.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like in the course of this conversation, I'm warming up to Threads more than I have been. Because again, for my purposes, like one thing that the two things they don't have right now, they do not have a reverse chronological feed of the people you follow. It's an algorithmic feed. That's all they have so far.
Okay.
And they don't have hashtags or search or like much search. You can search people's names, but no terms. And those are like the two most basic things on Twitter. And so for me, again, like every time I go to Threads, I mute a bunch of influencer accounts in the hopes that will lead the algorithm to get a better sense of like what I might want. But it keeps seeming not at all like Twitter for me and my purposes. But that's because Blue Sky feels like Twitter to me, because what I want is the weirdos who will talk to me about old Wired magazines, and they're all over there. But for advocacy comms, for people who are trying to reach a mass audience and get them to do a thing, it seems like a much more natural like translation, a move over of the things that you were trying to do on Twitter with a dwindling audience and a breaking platform. You can now pretty easily do over on Threads and achieve most of the same results because everybody's going there and at least trying it for now.
And I think as you do that, Madeline Toomey, again, giving a shout out to Madeline, wrote a piece or was quoted in Campaigns and Elections in June, actually. The story, which again I'll put in the footnotes, is whether you're on it or not, 2024 will be the TikTok election. And Madeline, who did the TikTok Influencer Summit for President Biden, did a lot of the TikTok stuff on the transition, put the Biden-Harris ads in video games and stuff in the 20 cycle, said that traditional political marketing cycle has started with research before moving to creative development phase to produce perfect 30-second ad, then deploying that creative across the paid organics. Instead, she says, because you have to move faster on social, she says, listening to the conversation, what are people talking about? What are the issues they care about? Create content that speaks to those issues. Maybe that means creating 3 different pieces of video content daily, see what works in social, iterate from there, and have this be a constant feedback loop, which is one of the things that's conceptually, it's the same as traditional comms, right? Where you want to know how are people responding, you'd poll, you'd cut an ad, you'd throw it up, you'd poll. Now it's just constant feedback. So it's engaging in a conversation. You're talking to voters, right? One of the things you and I talked about before hitting record on this was that one way to think about this is like canvassing. You and I both canvassed, right? We'd be handed a turf, your map, with the houses you're supposed to talk to and the ones you weren't supposed to talk to and what you're supposed to say at the house. And you go to every house and you say, hey, Dave, my name is Peter. I'm here with MassPerg, the Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group. You might remember as far as successes.
Why would you mention Berg to me?
I'm going into the rap I remember from when I was in college. It was the thing, but you have the conversation on the doorstep, right? And then direct mail is an inefficient conversation. Television is a less efficient conversation. Social media, you can get back to having an efficient conversation. Hey, the conversation here seems to be about Megan Rapinoe retiring from the U.S. national team after the Women's World Cup that starts real soon. Pino's been a really outspoken advocate on LGBT issues, on civil and human rights in the United States. That's what people are talking about. Great. Let's talk about sports advocacy and climate. How's it affecting athletes? Lionel Messi, arguably the best soccer player of all time, is going to be playing pro soccer in Miami. It's got like you're moving from Paris to Miami. That's going to have an impact on how you play the game. But that's the conversation, right? So it's the same logic, taking advantages of the nuances of the medium.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that's right. Again, the main thing I would say to advocates is this is all gonna keep developing over the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm not entirely sure that threads last longer than a month. It probably will, but they need to add a reverse chronological feed and a search function like yesterday. Like they clearly launched this thing before it was ready because Twitter was shooting itself in the foot and the mouth simultaneously, and they were like, all right, let's get in there. So I'm sure they've got developers who are building out sort of the most basic stuff. But if they don't, my guess is that we're gonna see everybody signing up and then nobody coming back. And it'll ghost town pretty quick, and then we'll be left with, again, Blue Sky and Mastodon and Twitter, and then 6 more things will launch. Or like, again, if I'm Mark Zuckerberg, I'm telling all the developers who work on Meta, like, take a vacation from Meta, you're working on Threads now, because I'm really fucking annoyed with Elon Musk, and I would like to break him in all of the ways. So like it's possible that Eloning at Mark Zuckerberg is going to lead to more of Meta's infinite resources getting poured into making that a success. And I think I've said this before on the pod, but like the core Twitter technology is the cutting edge of 2007. It can't be that hard to build out with enough skilled engineers. Oh, by the way, we didn't mention it as an aside, Elon is threatening, or maybe at this point has filed a lawsuit saying that Zuckerberg played dirty by hiring a bunch of the people that Elon fired to build a thing similar to the stuff that they already worked on. He fired them and claimed that they were incompetent, but then apparently they're not allowed to work in the field anymore, and he's upset that they did. Such a dumb boy. Anyway, that's an aside. The real point here is just that this, like, we as in the and in political advocacy have gotten used to having a pretty stable social media environment over the past decade, right? Like we've had a couple new entrants. Recently, we got TikTok, so it's looking like the relatively new thing. Even that's been around for a few years now. But like most of the big platforms have been around long enough that we kind of figured out how they fit together. We are going through a period of real chaos, and that's going to continue. So a couple months out, there'll be some new entrants, some will rise, some will fall. Twitter's going to keep on getting worse. Anything you try now, you should probably try again or sort of revisit in a few months, because things might just be a little different. The platforms might move, the people might move. Everything's going to be more chaotic than you were used to it being.
So, but what I want to raise is another question. So the most precious commodities any of us have are time and attention. Mm-hmm. And the most precious, and money buys you time because you can hire people to do things. And at some level, it can buy you attention because you can hire other people to think about things. Mm-hmm. If you're working on a campaign, some campaigns, money's an issue. On big campaigns, it's attention and time that are the issues. All right, you're talking about trying out platforms, revisit them. We're going to be measuring metrics, getting constant feedback on the metrics. You can dive really deep on who's engaging with what and at what level, and what are they doing about it? Are they donating? Are they volunteering? You know, that kind of stuff. In the real world of an advocacy campaign, how do you decide where to allocate limited social media resources?
Again, it depends a little on what you're trying to do. All right, this is going to be a tangent, but it's going to answer the question. Yesterday, I was reading the November 1996 issue of Wired magazine, because that's what I do.
I just want to point out, you mock me. So yesterday I was reading the classic November 96 issue.
No, but like that's because
tell you, we all know what that...
book on. I'm not, this isn't just like, I'm not watching Columbo. I'm like doing my research, Mr. Director of my program. So
don't mock Columbo. Don't mock. You're on thin ice there, Professor Karp.
1996. They spent the year with this.
I feel like we got to do the tape, taking you back. 1996.
Can I make my point, sir? Can I?
Bill Clinton was president of the United States.
So John Heilemann was hired by Wired throughout 1996 to write a column called The Netizen. He went on the campaign trail to watch this first digital election, and he spent the entire year bitching and moaning about how they're not being digital enough. It is tedious to read. So the November one is him doing a wrap up of like, okay, what happened? What do we learn? And the thing he kept on, like the thing that really upset him that he shared, and I think he'd shared this in previous columns too, but the thing that like really got to him was this conversation he had with a Phil Gramm staffer, because Phil Gramm was like talking about using the web. And he was like, yeah, like he didn't seem really committed to it. And the staffer says to him like, yeah, no, we just said that to get media, to just to get the media coverage. And John Hyland's circa 1996 feels betrayed by this because, like, why don't you realize the net revolution is coming, and why don't you try to play to the dozens of us who are online right now? And it's like, oh, sweetie, oh God. But the reason why I raise that now, like the reason that stands out is that is still very much true. That often what we're doing on social media, like the literature is caught up with this. We now call it hybrid media, right? Because a lot of what you were trying to do, I mean, hell, this was Trump's Twitter strategy, was you do things on social media because that's where the news organizations are, and then they cover it and that amplifies it. So like, if you want like a basic heuristic for over the next few months, where should you spend your time and attention? Ask yourself, who are the journalists that we want covering this at other sites? Where are they spending their time? If they're still on Twitter, then you're still on Twitter. If they've moved to Threads, you're on Threads. And in particular, like this really gets into the 1986 stuff. If a bunch of the coverage that you want, since Threads is pretty new and Blue Sky and other stuff are pretty new, if there's a bunch of editors right now assigning to their journalists, hey, go find out what's happening on this new thing, then you should probably invest on trying to look like what's happening on the new thing, because then you're going to get a bunch of novelty coverage that you otherwise wouldn't get. So like, it may sound kind of trite to be like, go where the journalists are so you can get their attention, but like, that's how it's always, like, that's been true since 1996. It's still true now. Like, if you want amplification, go where the amplifiers are.
Well, again, this is, or so two thoughts here. One is, it's not just circa 96, it goes back further. And I got to give a shout out here to Eric Loeb, who did email for every Democratic presidential campaign starting in 1992 up through, I think, Obama's midterm. Chris Casey, who wrote the first book about internet politics called The Hill on the Web. He was Senator Kennedy's systems administrator. And it was flailing and floundering, right? I mean, we had a Gopher server when I worked for Coppersmith, but this is further back. This is pseudo events, right? Why do you have a rally? To make it look like we're impressive and important. Why are you doing it in these places? Because this is where the reporters and the media coverage is, right? You go to where they are. Two other thoughts of this, though. One is, I think you make a really good point that you don't just follow the reporters. If you figure out people covering your issue are on Threads, you arrange a bunch of stuff to make it look like you own that space. We are making climate threads a thing. All the climate stuff is here, and just repost all the climate stuff, right? So now, hey, all the climate people are on Threads. Who's leading this charge? Oh, well, it's this climate group is leading this charge of climate on Thread. So now you're not just following the reporters, you're making it look as if everybody in the world cares about it and you're at the center of that universe, because that's what the reporter sees, therefore it must be happening, right? The second is outputs aren't outcomes, right? Coverage doesn't necessarily equal votes or policy change or donations. They can be, it's an important way to get at those things, but the point isn't to be in the New York Times, right? The point is to get a legislative victory in, Phoenix or in the Connecticut State House or in Congress, or it's to raise X amount of money, right? And so it's really easy for campaigns to mistake attention for action, right? And this makes every social media manager everywhere furious. Why? These people have many more followers than we do. Well, yeah, and they're all high school students, in Brazil. Like, we need to affect the city council, which means we need a handful of middle-aged moms and a couple of faith leaders. Like, we don't, yeah, but look at how many followers, right? So again, a familiar problem. Again, a familiar problem. But go where, who do you want to get to do what as a result of what you're doing? What do they need to hear from whom to get them to do it? Social is the same as canvassing, as the same as rallies, TV, direct mail, all the rest of it.
Yeah, the promise of social has tended to be, maybe this is a new lever, and when we pull it, maybe it can help us win a little bit more where we otherwise would be losing in fights where the deck is stacked against us. And usually the answer ends up being like, no, that lever didn't work very well, because when you're trying, anything that is worth doing is probably hard enough that like there's not going to be a magic bullet solution, right? Or a silver bullet solution. But still, if we're moving to a spot where things seem new, there's some new levers, like maybe pull them, particularly when something matters a lot. And otherwise the status quo is like, we're gonna get a little attention, we're gonna lose. You can fiddle a bit.
have some fun, fiddle with its right word, learn from it, don't be afraid to abandon it. And have the conversation, as Madeline says, engage in the conversation, listen to what's going on. The other piece of new tech with an eye to the clock, there's this other tech that, again, Madeline also talks about in the Hot Pod Insider newsletter, which is put out by The Verge. And it's on there. You have to have a subscription. So I'll share the link that I can. Again, this is also from July 6th. It's what podcasting in the 24th cycle. Mm-hmm. And Madeline's argument in a piece which tells both sides of it is that podcasting is like cable used to be. It's niche broadcasting. Some podcasts, tragically not ours, have more listeners and viewers than cable shows. But like, that's like this audience. I know everybody
we have more listeners and viewers than some cable shows.
No, that's true. That's true. And even in some podcasts, which is why we're canceling it as we're peaking, because
we're canceling because you took a service job that leaves you with no time. Because you're too much of a sucker to say no.
It's a very passive aggressive way to get out of doing the podcast. But you can identify, like, people listening to a podcast care about a specific thing. And if there are enough of them there, get on that podcast and you're just feeding that content to that thing, right? Again, it's like canvassing. When I canvass with a group that apparently you hate and about which I'm deeply, deeply ambivalent. Oh, look, there's a Volvo in the driveway with a no nukes bumper sticker. I'm talking to these people. Like, that's podcasting. Right.
I would prefer not to think of podcasting as canvassing because I enjoy podcasting.
I hate canvassing so much.
But you enjoy podcasting.
Podcasting is fun. I only have to talk to you, and it's not actually in person, which is sort of the best of both worlds.
It's the best way to talk to me.
Talk to in person. Like, this knocking on doors of strange. Oh God, it was awful. But again, if you think about podcasting, we're going to do podcasts. I don't know who's listening to the pod and what are they doing about it. Right? It'd be great to get on smart lists somehow. Everybody listens, but nobody listens to smart lists. That's a really interesting idea. I will now write a letter to my city councilman, right? Instead, it's hopefully if you're listening to this podcast, hey, social media, here's a way to think about social media. Or if it's I don't know, if you're on climate, you take this climate action, right? But again, it's potentially, don't write off podcasting because it's peaked. Don't embrace it because it's the next big thing. Figure out, does it help you get to the next thing? Again, bearing in mind, time and attention are limited. Will it get you more than the other thing you could be doing while you're doing the podcast?
Yeah. And the thing I'd add to that, I think peaked is, I would use a different word than peaked, which is stabilized.
Stabilized.
Right. And the difference there is once something has stabilized, you can get a decent feel for, like, what is this thing good for? Like, what can it do well? What can't it do well? When it's still on the rise, like, any hunch you have, you get to recheck later because, well, it's still on the rise. Maybe things are changing. Like, podcasting isn't over, but it ain't growing anymore for sure.
Right.
And so now you kind of know what the big podcasts are. If you can get on those, you know what on, if you can get on Joe Rogan, a lot of people are going to listen to you and they all suck. Yeah. Right. If you can get on Kara Swisher's podcast, like, I will listen to you because that podcast is great and it's huge. So like, and if you can get on our podcast, then like our former students and current students will listen to you, which is very useful if you want to like let them know that they should sign up for strategic political communication. Great class. But like the point here is once that has stabilized, you can then familiarize yourself with what does this work for and what doesn't, and you can then ask yourself, when is this going to be worth our time and attention? When should we do this instead of something else? When a medium is growing, like right now, you can't really do that with Threads because it's less than a week old. And so as things are changing, and you also can't do it with Twitter because it's breaking down. So it is when it is stabilized that you can kind of make those assessments and be confident in them. That's where we are with podcasting now, less so with other social.
There we go. That sounds like a great way to end this thing.
Great way to end. We'll say, we were going to talk a little bit about climate and I was going to be depressing. We can say that for next time. There'll be plenty of time to be depressing about climate later.
Yeah, we've got, good news on climate is there'll always be something to be depressed about. It's eye to the clock. It's summer school. These kids, they want to go do summer school things.
We had several days of the hottest day in world history last week, and it's early July. The world is hotter than it has ever been, and we are responding by mostly discussing which billionaire is going to punch which other billionaire in the head. not the world we wanted to live in, definitely the world we do live in. But again, tune in 2 weeks and I will whine about that.
All right. So that you got your update on how to handle all the new social media. The answer to that is, I don't know, somebody should be handling every other media. And Dave is angry. Thank you as always to Alana.
Angry and a little sad. Angry and a little sad. That's my
Angry and a little sad. We're just trying to find the perfect balance, the Pareto point of Dave's level of Dave's misery and anger. Thank you always for listening. Thank you, Alana, for producing. I would say rate us, follow us, like us, but please don't be on Twitter.
Still rate us, follow us, and like us. I'm telling you, this will come out of the hibernate. We're just hibernating it now. It's going to come back someday.
We're just
It's
hibernating.
not like either of us going to have a different job. We're going to be working at SMPA for the rest of our lives. So the podcast will come back.
rattling our rhetorical cans in the cyberspace. Taking for attention for faceless strangers. It's sad, is what it is. So now I'm sad. It's time to go. We've had enough of this. Thanks, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.